Hi, this is Jason Gorber for ThatShelf.com. I'm here in New York Central Park because what better place to do a video about The Irishman here at the New York Film Festival. I flew all the way from Toronto to New York to see this film the way it was meant to be seen on a big giant screen with a bunch of surly New Yorkers complaining that they're schlepping in from Brooklyn. Anyway, the joy of this film to see is simply extraordinary. The fact that it even exists is cause for celebration. And I know that sounds hyperbole, that I'm some sort of Scorsese fanboy. Sue me. The film is pretty tremendous, and it's almost ridiculous that somebody at the age of, I guess, 76 is churning out masterworks like this. It's truly extraordinary. Some backstory. This is a book that was actually optioned over a decade ago by one of the film's producers and the star, Robert De Niro, and they were looking for a way to actually sort of bring back some of the spark that they had with films like Casino and Goodfellas. They wanted to look in a different way into the gangster lifestyle, following this dude named Frank, who was an Irishman, and more importantly, he ended up being a hitman of sorts for, well, a hitman for the mafia, but tied very much to the Jimmy Hoffa story. So this way you get labor policy, you get government corruption, you get conspiracy theories, and you get a mafia story all in one. And the end result is something which really does draw from all these tropes and genre elements, but creates a story which is as personal and as political as any Martin Scorsese has ever made. The cast is obviously ridiculous. Yes, we have Robert De Niro back working along with Joe Pesci, who isn't quite retired, but sort of has certainly slowed down the film productions that he does, and he is so amazing in this film. He plays essentially the token mafia guy that De Niro's character sort of liaises with, and the dynamic obviously is similar to work that they've done before, but again, it's different shades, different nuances on the elements that we've seen. So every time, every moment that we think that we've seen these characters do these things before, we see them in a different way. It's not dissimilar to something like, let's say, Shakespearean actors who you've seen them do Lear and then you suddenly see them in Macbeth. You're seeing within the same sort of general universe these kind of characters and characterizations play out, but in very different ways that thematically owe a lot to each other and genre-wise owe a lot to each other, but really are fundamentally individual and quite remarkable works. We got Harvey Keitel back in a relatively minor role, but nonetheless the Mean Street star, the film that really put Scorsese on the map, this really astonishing sort of shout out to independent cinema that had Keitel and De Niro sort of pitted against each other. The pairing eventually would not be as tight as it is for De Niro and Pesci, but nonetheless it's really engaging to have him there. And then the big draw, Al Pacino, person who has never worked with Martin Scorsese before after decades of them threatening to work together. It's always time for a little bit of celebration whenever you actually have on screen Pacino and De Niro at the same time, because of course in Godfather 2 they play in two different timelines. But the way that the dynamic plays here with Al Pacino as this real wild and zany Hoffa. Yes, we're getting Pacino, big Pacino, the big, loud, screaming Pacino, but he adds so much humanity into this character that it's really often unsettlingly disturbing in such a real, wild and fantastic way. The other big thing about this film is it's incredibly funny. There's some supremely darkly humorous elements in the Steve Zaillian script. I mean, this is the guy who wrote Schindler's List and did some terrible stuff like Red Sparrow. He's had a really ridiculously diverse career. But the way that he put all these elements together, like he did in Wolf of Wall Street, is to craft a film that absolutely gels, that really brings all these disparate elements and allows them to play out. Now, the film does have a quite liberal running time. It's 3 hours and 20 minutes or so, but it never feels long. Everything feels that it's very much of a part. And even the moments where the film does take its time, slows down, especially in the last act, it all feels earned. We feel like in the best, for lack of a better word, best episodic shows where we feel that we've really learned to understand the characters so that when they have these moments of quiet, they're absolutely in keeping and engaged with what we are already understanding these characters to be. In terms of how it fits into Scorsese's canon, obviously there's a lot of Goodfellas, there's a lot of Mean Streets, there's a lot of silence in this. There's a lot from his previous film Silence, which is very much a rumination on identity, about how you were, about faith, about guilt, about all these elements that are pretty fundamental to Scorsese's canon. But the sort of the cousin film, the one that's directly applicable, as it were, is Casino, my favorite Scorsese film. And if you sort of check the boxes off, we got a film that's about Vegas, about the mob, about Don Rickles, about the way that the Teamsters sort of were used by the mafia to actually fund all these elements, Castro, Cuba, presidential politics. All of these come into play in pretty phenomenal ways. Obviously, there's lots of good Godfather references there too, especially The Godfather 2. This isn't new regions to explore, of course. These have been explored in many, many films, not just by Martin Scorsese or Francis Coppola for that matter. But nonetheless, in this film, they're contextualized in such a beautiful and succinct way, despite the long running time, that it really feels incredibly fresh and nostalgic simultaneously. Now again, to the nostalgic point, one of the things that lots of people will know about, and certainly the thing that ballooned the budget and allowed only a VOD company to actually be the one to produce it, because no studio would touch it, is the de-aging process. They actually use Industrial Light and Magic, the George Lucas company, to basically do CGI makeup. We've seen this before. We've seen it in Benjamin Button. We've seen it complete facial reconstruction. But this allowed them to shoot using multiple cameras and multiple lenses simultaneously to capture all the micro expressions and de-age our central characters. And by doing so, we tell the story over decades using the same performers. Now, some people can actually suggest, why don't you just use different actors? That's certainly what they do with some of the kids. Anna Paquin's character was played by a much younger actress. But there's really something quite special in how engaged, particularly with some of the key performances by De Niro, Pacino, and Pesci, as you see their identities shift over time as they age. It's not quite Boyhood. It's not something as dramatic as that, which obviously the greatest special effect in Boyhood was time, but it definitely keeps you involved in the film. It doesn't feel that it's a disparate bunch of disparate elements colliding with one another as each performer comes in to play a different role. It really feels very much like one arc, one story of individual characters, and as such, the technology serves the story, and that's the fundamental point. Now, some people are going to complain about Uncanny Valley. Some people are going to complain that it doesn't work shot to shot. They may be pausing at home and trying to nitpick exactly what's going on. Forget all that. The film is so engaging, the story is so captivating, that if that's what you're worrying about, it's like worrying about the maybe the wallpaper is in the right era for what we're actually seeing here. Speaking of, the production design is amazing as it always is in Scorsese films, but nonetheless, you take my point. The way the entire film assembles as this often visceral, incredibly raw and violent film that's really about character, truly fundamentally about the thoughts and motivations of these individuals, that at every time, at every moment, you understand the decisions they make, even if they're horrendous. And that is very rare. That this is a film that absolutely is note perfect in recognizing how each person got to where they at, the hubris, the ostentation, the quiet sort of capacity of people to compartmentalize, to take their family life away from their personal life, their family life away from their professional life. All of these elements play out. And if you look at De Niro's character in particular, here's a guy that easily could turn into some sort of weird, maudlin, almost Catholic guilt-ridden character. Think of Harvey Keitel in something like the original Bad Lieutenant, where he's going all the time. A sort of tortured soul that if you're doing something so bad, clearly you must be tortured about it. For that matter, it's Keitel in Mean Streets. Very much that character who's constantly butting his head against what he should be versus what actually is. De Niro plays a soldier. He plays not only an ex-military person, but somebody that recognizes the role that he has to play. He recognizes its moral ambiguity, and he still manages to compartmentalize it. He doesn't do so out of lunacy, doesn't do, I mean, it's certainly sociopathic, but he doesn't do anything out of any particular desire to do harm. He does so because it's the job that he is set out to do, and he wants to do his job well. And the way that plays out is super chilling and super convincing. This is one of those mob movies that really feels that it's neither aggrandizing or apologizing for the life that these characters lead. And so when he's reflecting upon his story, it's absolutely somebody who's doing so not with an emotional distance, but certainly with a fundamental acceptance of what he did, even if the outside world sees this as completely abhorrent, which obviously it should. The interplay between all these factions, between the politics, between the union, between the mafia, and all their different iterations about who's lying to whom, about who gets co-opted into it, about the way that the money fluctuates, about the way that the characters change over time, is really what sets the film apart. It's a truly extraordinary journey, and there's some beautiful little echoes to things. I think of The Last Shot, which is this amazing reversal of the final shot of Godfather. When you see the film, you'll see exactly what I mean. Whether or not it's overt, I assume it is because it seems pretty explicit, but it's such a different way of showcasing about the sort of fear and trepidation that's at play versus the sort of more closed and cloistered aspect that plays out in other films that deal with this sort of aspect. It's a really, really remarkable moment, and absolutely, again, the third act, which easily could have felt like it could have ended at any point, and yet every moment that actually kept going on, you realize that it was getting a richer and richer and more detailed view of who this character was. Incredible performances, beautiful cinematography. I mean, there's tracking shots, they're just unbelievable. The music is great. It's got a whole bunch of needle drops, as we come to expect. And Robbie Robertson's soundtrack is actually very different than a lot of stuff that he's done before. It's this weird, somber, almost Jarmuschian. I mean, and in some ways, I was reminded a very little bit of the Neil Young stuff from Dead Man. It's this collision between this sort of twangy electric guitar and these sort of haunting elements that sort of elevate it, that lift it up, that give it this sort of mysterioso vibe. The collision between the two elements, and we're never quite sure about how it all plays out. Altogether, you have an incredible film that exists, and that is the biggest cause for celebration. This film easily could never have been made. This film is a treasure that is even there, and as such, we will celebrate it for what it is, which is this unbelievable thing that exists that Martin Scorsese was able to make this late in his career. Step aside, as objectively as one can be hours after seeing the bloody thing, this truly feels like very much a part of his masterworks. This feels very much something that nestles nicely with not only the sort of more overt references, but also things like the Raging Bulls, the Coon Dunes, the Silences, these films where he's really gone in for the sort of more metaphysical elements, the more spiritual elements, and finds a different answer in this film than he has elsewhere. It's a pretty fascinating insight into the type of work that he's been making over decades now, and it's another piece, it's a giant piece within this mosaic of films that Martin Scorsese has managed to achieve. As an opening film, it's a smash, and honestly, no other studio was willing to make this, so bless the VOD company for going ahead and doing it. The challenge is that the vast majority of people will see this, will see it where they're just going to pause it, they're going to get up and go to the bathroom, they're going to be on their phone. Please, if you have a chance, see this film on the biggest screen possible you can. In Toronto, I'll be playing Lightbox. My dream would be for it to play at Cinesphere. This is beautiful and something demanding of the biggest bloody screen you can find. If there's a way to see it that way, whatever the best presentation, and treat it like a cinematic artifact, because it truly is. This is a film. This is not an extended TV show. This is not some sort of weird thing that we're going to play. This is as cinematic as anything else you're going to see this year. It truly is one of the great films of 2019, which is already a preposterously good year for film. And you have just iconic, incredible actors at the sort of twilight of their careers nailing it. You have a director who has spent decades changing cinema and changing the language of how we even interact with these films. The fact that we have multiple generations now borrowing so liberally from the films that he's made, from everything from blockbusters to tiny indies, just shows the effect that this man has had on cinema. And here we have in this, just to show, forget Scorsese, we have Scorsese, we have The Irishman. We have another remarkable film to add to his canon. If they don't release this on 4K and only leave it on VOD, I personally will be upset, because this is a film that, yeah, I'll watch on streaming, but I want lots of extras, I want making ofs, and more importantly, this is something that I actually want to cherish and feel very much a part of my general collection. For thatshelf.com, I'm Jason Gorber. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave comments. Let us know what you think of these videos. Please subscribe and click the bell. That would be amazing. And more importantly, follow us on social and check out the website. We'd really appreciate. We'd love to hear what you guys think, and enjoy the conversation, and more importantly, enjoy The Irishman. It's such a blast. Take care.